Welcome everyone to our event, Continuing the Legacy, Black Education in North Carolina. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rhonda Dillingham, Executive Director of the North Carolina Association for Public Charter Schools. And I'm proud and humbled to say that the support of our over 145 member schools have made the association the leading voice for charter schools in our state. It is my pleasure to host this special event today in honor of Black History Month. While Black History Month is a great opportunity to highlight the importance of the role of public charter schools in the education of Black students, it is an issue of importance and a focus of the association all year round. With racial tensions erupting as a result of the death of George Floyd, in addition to COVID-19's effect on school closures, we can all agree that the 2020-21 school year has been incredibly challenging. However, too often when there are overwhelming or unexpected challenges that affect all students, it can be forgotten that underserved communities must also face those challenges on top of the inequities they already face. Spending over 20 years in the classroom and in the head office has influenced my work at the association to prioritize spaces and opportunities like this for honest conversation to find workable solutions, which is what our state students and educators deserve. That's why I invited this esteemed group to speak with us today. The schools represented by their leaders on our panel have empowered their students, particularly their students of color, to make tremendous academic gains. Now, we all know that North Carolina has not been immune to the struggles for equality. In fact, the civil rights movement has its beginnings in the city I grew up in, Greensboro, with the first sit-in occurring at the downtown Woolworths. On February 1st, 1960, 4 African-American college students sat down at the all-white lunch counter and politely asked for service. Their request was refused. When asked to leave, they remained in their seats. We're fortunate to have an activist who took part in those sit-ins on our panel today, my friend, Mr. Clarence Henderson. Thank you for joining us, Clarence.
You're quite welcome. Hello, everybody.
Hey there. And we have some other special guests on our panel too. My friend, Mr. Marcus Brandon, former North Carolina legislator and current executive director of CarolinaCAN. Dr. Michelle Johnson, superintendent of the North Carolina College Preparatory and Leadership Academy, otherwise known as The Point. Mr. Eric Sanchez, co-founder with his wife and school leader of Henderson Collegiate. And Ms. Cheryl Turner, superintendent of Sugar Creek Charter School and vice chair of the Charter School Advisory Board. Now, moderating the panel discussion for us today is Mr. Ron Rice, Senior Director of Government Relations with the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Welcome to you all. I so appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us to discuss how public charter schools fit into the history of Black education in North Carolina. Ron, thank you for agreeing to guide today's conversation. And at this time, I'm going to hand things off to you.
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you to the North Carolina Association for Public Charter Schools, you and your staff, for allowing us to have this opportunity. I think this is a vital discussion that needs to happen, and I can't think of a better time to do it than during Black History Month. And so, like the song says in Smokey and the Bandit, we got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So we're just going to jump right in with the first question that I want to pose to Mr. Henderson and to Mr. Brandon. Folks, according to a report put out in 2019 by the Center for Racial Equality in Education, North Carolina has a history of African Americans starting schools. When newly freed slaves started communities in North Carolina like Freedom Hill and Princeville, one of the first things they did was to build schools and organize themselves to pay for buildings, supplies, and teachers. So this begs the question today in 2021, if creating schools by us and for us is in the North Carolinian DNA, Where is that spirit today among modern day African Americans in North Carolina to create their own schools? And if they want to create their own schools that are public, they would have to be charter schools. And Marcus, I'll throw it to you first, and then Mr. Henderson, if you have any thoughts on your own to add to that.
Thank you for that, Ron. It's an interesting question, and thank you, Rhonda, for allowing us to be on the panel. It's something that I learned way back when I went to North Carolina A&T. I started learning the roots of education, not only here in North Carolina, but all over, with Mary McLeod and some of the AME work and things like that. But and then I got to learn that even my own family went to Charlotte Hawkins Brown School right here, right outside of right here in Gibsonville, and right here in Guilford County. And so even in my DNA and my personal DNA, we had a history of schools that were for us by us. I even was a graduate of a Seventh-day Adventist preschool. And so that has significant history also. So when I went to A&T, the first day of class, they told us about philosophies of Du Bois, Carver, and Washington. And so, but what I learned was that our ancestors had a clear message to us of what would happen if we allowed people that did not look like us educate us. And so, and regardless of their differences that they had, all of them pretty much had a consensus on that, and how we were supposed to use that knowledge and use that infrastructure to build our society within African Americans. Somehow, we've allowed that conversation to go away because exactly what they warned us is exactly the 70 years of statistics that we all continue to talk about.
Mr. Henderson, your thoughts about that, about sort of the North Carolinian African American sort of grabbing the bull by the horns and creating the kind of educational institutions and schools that would best serve our communities, with us being the people that started. Why do you think there's such a, I won't say we've forgotten those roots in North Carolina, but what do you think is missing from the DNA of our current North Carolinians about creating schools by us and for us in the state of North Carolina?
Well, first of all, Marcus, thank you for reminding me of Palmer Memorial Institute. Right. As a matter of fact, that's where Nat King Cole's wife attended at that school. I think the DNA is still there. The challenge is, I'm sure that Marcus didn't come across his mind. One of the challenges is resources. We're challenged from a financial point of view to be able to keep those kind of schools going, because I remember maybe last year, something like that, maybe 2 years ago, we wanted to get, there's a charter school in Greensboro, and they needed money for transportation. And we went down to the general counsel. As a matter of fact, they had put it forth, but somehow or another they said, well, we forgot to put it on the budget. And so it's one of those things where that, for whatever reason, we seem to still be forgotten. And so we had to continue to challenge them and make them aware of that. And what better time than this? Because see, when I grew up, they didn't talk about the success of Blacks that much. And we have such great success even through adversities that it shows that it's not where you come from, it's where you're going. And it's not what's behind you, not in front of you, it's what's in you. And so we just have to make sure that we give these kids that opportunity, because see, what happens is that if we don't do that, you know what the results is. I think that Rhonda was talking about a few minutes ago, I think she was talking about the crime rate and all these kind of things. Things that are going on right now is because that these kids' voices are not heard. And so these schools, academies, you guys have an opportunity for these kids' voices to be heard and continue to let them know that they not only can they be somebody, they are somebody.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's a good segue to the actual school leaders that are on our panel here. So Dr. Johnson, Dr. Turner, Dr. Sanchez, I call you all doctors because you are excellent in running high quality schools to educate our kids. And so that deserves a doctor moniker because you are actually acting as doctors in our community, whether you earn that distinction via study or not. To the charter school leaders of color on the panel, what are some of the misconceptions about you as a leader of color and your school? And what are the biggest obstacles that you all have to overcome? And what are your most cherished accomplishments? I want to start with Dr. Johnson on that one first.
Thank you. And it's good to be here. Thank you to the association for hosting this event. I will start by going back to your original question, if that's okay, because the spirit of starting schools for us and by us runs deeply. I come from a family that started one of the first African-American started charter schools in North Carolina, and it still exists today. And from that, we were mentored into being able to start our own school just 30 miles down the road. So the spirit exists. I think we have to do a better job with interrogating how to make it happen, because there are people who definitely want to start schools in our communities. But we need a training ground for that to happen so that we know the pitfalls and we know the struggles and the issues that come along with it, because you're starting a real bona fide school. This is not like a club. It's not an after school program. This is a legitimate school that's going to prepare scholars to go into the workforce, go into college, and to be the best that they can be. Not only that, it's going to provide employment to the community as well. So we have to look at a holistic approach to what we are doing. So the spirit is there. We just have to put somehow organize our way around helping those who do want to start schools, helping them to navigate the waters and helping them to build the school in a way that it's going to be sustainable. Because what you don't want is you don't want a school that's going to be in the community for 5 years and then it's closed down. So that's extremely important. We have the knowledge to do it. I believe we are capable people. We are creative people. As you said, the history proves that we've done it before and we can do it again. Even in spite of there are obstacles, there are issues, there are infrastructure issues, just finding a location, finding a facility. There are issues in terms of having startup capital, having the money to do it, so that when you get the money to do it, when you get an investor, when you have someone who is going to contribute to your school, that you are not owned by that person who invests in your school. And it turns out not to be for us, by us, but a school that's in a community that's owned by people who are not in the community. And so there's a larger discussion that we have to have around that, but the spirit is present. We have schools that have been opened who were founded by African Americans and that are being run by African American and that are doing it well. And so we have to replicate that. We have to push that into communities all across North Carolina. Now to your other question, not to take up so much time, I would say that one of the obstacles, and I think Mr. Henderson mentioned this before, was one of the obstacles that I believe, but it's also a blessing, is we provide transportation to our scholars. Without adequate transportation, there is no choice. So you can't say you're a school of choice if parents cannot access you. So we provide transportation to our scholars. We reach over 10 districts. Some scholars are on the bus for 2 hours because their parents have chosen for them to be in our school. So they are coming near and far to be a part of our school. And our budget, we have to budget at least $500,000 a year for transportation. That, I would say, is a challenge because we do it, right? And we get our scholars to us. But I would say that $500,000, I would rather be using that to have more bodies in the classroom, to have more qualified people in the classroom who can actually put hands and smiles to the faces of the scholars, to give them resources and experiences that they wouldn't have if there were other funding for transportation that could be used. Now, the state did have a transportation grant and it ended up being about $100,000. But of course, our budget to serve 850 scholars who are 99.5% African American is $500,000. Now, there's a lot more I could be doing with that if I had the resources to provide transportation for them.
Ms. Turner, your thoughts on the same thing. What are some of your obstacles? I assume they're probably similar to Dr. Johnson's, but what are your obstacles and what are you most proud about in terms of the accomplishments of your school?
I agree with everything that Dr. Johnson just said. We own 30 buses. We run 30 buses a day, and it costs us over $1 million to run buses. We have 1,700 students, but 80% of them ride the bus. And what could you do with $1 million if you didn't have to spend it on transportation? You know, in terms of what I think I'm most proud of about Sugar Creek, our mission is to eradicate generational poverty in the lives of our students. And we have seen this. We have 4 graduating classes now. Our first graduating class are seniors in college this year. The first class was 32 children, 28 of them went to college, 26 of them will graduate on time. The one other is in a 5-year program. So we're accomplishing our goal. Our kids will not have to live the way they lived growing up. And some of the things they've had to deal with are pretty amazing. But one of the things we say all the time is that those are stepping stones, they're not obstacles. Your ability to be resilient in those situations is how we build on your resiliency as you go on through life, and it sets you up to be successful.
And Eric, a Latinx or Hispanic, whichever you choose, running a rural school, but a high performing school in North Carolina. What are some of your obstacles and what are some of the things that make you most proud about the work you and your wife are doing?
Yeah, thank you, Ron. One, just appreciate and humble to be on this panel with such an amazing group of people and certainly Clarence Henderson and what he's done. Yeah, so I mean, you know, the transportation, even child nutrition, like those things make the school accessible in a way that Cheryl and I have fought for that national, you know, on a state level, that you need those things in order to truly say that you're trying to make your school accessible. I was thinking about it when you asked the question, kind of like as a person from color, like how was this like, and I was trying to think of more identity within it. You know, our context is rural. It's a rural school. You're right, a Latinx guy from New York out here. So making sure in a rural world where things get put in buckets quick, black and white buckets very quick, things of that sort, that we were able to create a school that could access support all over the place. And that while we were unapologetic, we were going to market to low-income children, and that our school was going to be predominantly made up of students of color. And it's 90% low income and 95% students of color, that we were going to be able to access support as the whole community, that it was going to be a community endeavor for this school to be there and to be supported. Along those lines, I think feeds into our achievement, which is to change the paradigms of all those people who thought that we were creating this thing to help minorities or people of color be more compliant. That we were going to be this alternative school that could help take a problem they couldn't solve and turn it into citizens that could contribute to society in a very low level of thinking. We were going to change that paradigm. And as Cheryl said, and we've learned so much from Sugar Creek and from Cheryl, we were going to produce kids that were going to go to and through college, kids that were going to change their destinies, that were going to show that zip codes don't determine your destiny and that you can be world changers. And we're on that path. I mean, there's tons of hurdles, and Cheryl and I could talk about that all day, and the challenges that we bumped into. But whether it's from academic distinctions to test scores, or to 100% kids being accepted to college, we're changing those paradigms. And now people are expecting different things. The conversation has changed about what education should be and what we should be expecting from our children, which I think is probably the greatest achievement we've had.
No, I would agree, Eric. I think hitting on the changing paradigms and sort of redefining what education looks like, should be, can be in terms of outcomes, I think is it's not the magic, but it's what the model of public education in terms of charter schools actually allows for. It allows for that freedom, that school-based management, that school-based decision-making, that allows a school or a network of schools even to turn on a dime to address the needs that are coming up at any time that maybe a district, because of the size of the bureaucracy or the size of the number of the interests, right, that are involved in those things, can't really do. And that's not a negative. It's just that, you know, the model of the charter school, particularly, it tends to be a little bit more nimble. And I think about sort of the responses to COVID that have happened, now probably not even in North Carolina, but all over the country, in terms of responding to the needs of parents and the children that you serve. I want to pivot real back because I want to get some more thoughts on this. But in 2019 seemed to be a famous year about education, particularly in North Carolina. Seth Gershenson of American University released the results of his findings on North Carolina's student-teacher race match in charter and traditional public schools, with a number of surprising results. What he found was that traditional public schools and charter schools serve the same proportion of Black students, but charter schools have about 35% more Black teachers. Okay, that was one thing. And then he also found that Black students in charter schools are about 50%. Now, these are not small numbers, 50% more likely to have a Black teacher than their traditional public school counterparts. I want to throw this out to Marcus, but anybody else who wants to answer first. But what are the benefits of having a same race teacher, particularly for Black students and students of color in general, particularly when we see nationwide that the teaching core in traditional public schools of African-American male teachers, for instance, is 2%. These findings really show something is happening in charter schools in North Carolina that maybe the traditional district schools can learn from. So Marcus, I just want to get your thoughts on about that. Sure,
it's one of the greatest obvious studies that we have. That's what I call. I'm glad they did the study, but of course we all knew this, and we saw it. We see it every day in our schools, and we've had the data for a long time about what it looks like to have a person that looks like you in the classroom. EVA scores literally go up 30-40% with teachers that are actually educating kids that look like them, and vice versa. So what we have to understand is that the system, the same way the system had failed, and there's systematic injustices in terms of how we deal with our students, that same system had systematic injustice of how we get educators. And so we loaded it up with barriers, and we said you had to have past praxis and personality tests and all of these things to make sure that, you know, we basically kept that profession looking like they wanted to look like. And so much to the detriment of our kids, because we that data has been there. So now you've seen a push, and I think that Michelle can talk a little bit more about some of the programs that I push for as a lobbyist, and to allow for us to move away from that systematic process in terms of how we select teachers, and allow LEAs like your own charter or your own school system to be able to incubate kids that might not have went into education first, that not necessarily they want to, they necessarily have a teaching certificate or went to school for a school of ed, but they now, because they have life and they've lived life, they might want to be interested in teaching. And there's different ways that they get there. And it also helps increase our African American and Hispanic male population, which is even more dismal. and even higher numbers in performance, right? And so so we as schools of choice, we have a lot, particularly charters, we have some flexibility around being able to be intentional about being intentional of hiring that. Along coupled with that, we are going to attract those teachers because they want to be a part of that culture.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the numbers and the data has been there for years, and we did pass that bill, and we do have these capabilities, and people like DePoint and some, and even in CMS have used this, and I hope Michelle talks about it because it's a really great program, and others are duplicating this, and where we are able to skirt around those designed systematic issues that really kept, I think, African American students out of education, and starting in year 2 college.
Well, Dr. Johnson, you've been punted to, so I'm gonna you have to grab the kick now and run with the ball.
Wow. So thank you, Marcus.
Yeah.
So having a quality teacher is first and foremost important, and having a teacher, not just a teacher, but having leaders as well who represent the community, that is important as well. And the research also says that it's not just a benefit for students, for African American students, it's a benefit for all students. All students benefit from this. And so one of the things that we try to do at our school is we try to create an incubator. We, as a charter, we have a flexibility to do so. So you create an incubator, and where you grow from within. If you want for us, by us, you're gonna have to grow. You're gonna have to grow it yourself. And so you create an incubator, and you do that recruiting, not necessarily looking for people who are coming out of traditional education programs, or those who have been in traditional public school systems all their life, because that may come with some challenges as well. So you do recruiting that is creative. First and foremost, looking for people who have the love for the people they're going to be teaching, and knowledge of some level of knowledge of the history and the liberation struggle that leads to freedom. So that is, you have to create that incubator and grow. I have found some amazing African-American teachers who were at one time teachers assistants in the traditional public school system, who had degrees. For some reason, I don't know why people couldn't see their awesomeness, who had degrees and who just needed somebody to see them and to help them grow. And so have grown them. Some have grown from teacher assistant to lead teacher to school leader. You just have to see them and grow them and recruit the best way possible. And also some of those who have high schools who have students who are probably getting ready to come to graduate college. That's a way for you to grow your high school students, get them through college, and then have them come back to the school because they know the culture, they know the expectations, and it's a breeding ground, just not for education, but for employment, for community development, for eradicating poverty and hopelessness. So you have to look at it holistically.
Dr. Johnson, you make a good point, and it's a good segue to our next question. And I want to get Cheryl and Mr. Henderson and Eric on this as well. And Marcus, you can bring up the rear on this. But you talked about creating a holistic approach, and I think when people think about charter schools, they think about it as just an education and the debates that happen around it, instead of looking at it as an ecosystem for real self-determination within the African American and Latinx communities. And what do I mean by that? And so my question really revolves around HBCUs as an example. When you have, for instance, I think it may be North Carolina may have 10 HBCUs, and what may be the largest HBCU in the nation, which is North Carolina A&T State University. And much of the difficulties of running a successful institution of higher learning can be attributed to a large portion of their budgets being spent in providing remedial services to new students, and therefore having a student population that stays longer than the 4 years normally associated with pursuing an undergraduate degree, and not having enough students coming to campus, and then not having enough graduates finding good paying jobs after graduation because they're saddled now with not just 4 years of debt, but 5, 6, maybe even 7 years of debt. Why don't HBCUs, particularly in North Carolina, embrace creating charter school networks that will prepare students K through 12 to be able to do college level work, and then provide a pipeline for new students to come to their respective campuses and provide teaching jobs to their graduates from their respective schools of education, not to mention the use of Black vendors and contractors to support those charter schools from the local communities where their colleges and universities are located. A number of folks, as they talk about charter schools, particularly led by people of color, talk about creating those waves of self-determination where you're preparing kids to handle college work, that they're going to HBCUs, that they're staying for less time, that the schools then have to provide less dollars for remediation and more on having greater academic curricula, and then employing the teachers that come out of those schools and jobs and the contractors and the vendors. Cheryl, can you speak to maybe why HBCUs in particular, but the African-American community specifically, has not thought about charter schools creating that kind of, as Dr. Johnson said, holistic self-determination in terms of economic development, educational development, and community empowerment?
I really can't speak for HBCUs since I'm not one, and I didn't attend one. I honestly don't have the answer to that question, but I would like to go back to something that Dr. Johnson was talking about.
Sure.
When we were talking about staffing. And I found a couple of things. We don't have problems finding African-American teachers, even including African-American males. We have a large percentage of African-American males, even teaching in elementary school. And what I found is that these are people who can connect to the mission. They want to make a difference in their own community. And in some of the schools where they've worked before, it's not possible because it's not set up to be successful. And so they come to our schools where we all see it as it not only can happen, it must happen. And they find a place where they can make a difference. And so we don't have a hard time recruiting. We've been fortunate at Sugar Creek. When we are interviewing schools and stuff, I'm amazed at the number of people who come in who are new school leaders who at one point or another work for Sugar Creek. So we're building in that way. And then I want to mention that the Office of Charter Schools at DPI has started a program for leaders of color to get their master's in school leadership, and then to be able to open charter schools here in North Carolina. The program's new, it's the first year, and there are 14 people in it, and it is at no cost to them to get their master's. So that's the beginning of a pipeline. I can't speak to why the HBCUs aren't doing it.
And I'm not going to make you do that either. so maybe I'll kick it to Marcus and to Clarence. And again, the thinking really being, I know I put a lot into that question, but really the crux of it is leaders of color that I work with that come to DC and lobby for federal dollars for charter schools, particularly because that's how leaders of color get their initial dollars in a lot of ways to create charter schools, always talk about it differently than some of my white counterparts who run charter schools. They see charter schools as being places that will allow for example, an African-American or Latinx leader to run a school, and then to hire teachers who look like them from the community, and to hire graduates from those schools, and to see this as economic development and as community empowerment. They see it as more than just a brick and mortar school in the community, but as something that has waves of good things, a win-win-win-win, if you will, for the African-American and Latinx communities, in a way that traditional district schools just have not done and not provided for people. And just wondering your thoughts about that reality, and how can we get HBCUs is one example, fraternal organizations are another, but how do we sell that gospel, if you will?
I think it's a mindset, and I'll speak from what I see, and that sometimes really gets underneath my skin, but we're seeing it break a little bit. But it's always been a mindset, even within the HBCU community, of what we can do outside of the community, and we've seen chains go around those schools, and we see fences up, and we see barriers from the community. We see this at our HBCUs, and it's a mindset that it really concerns me, and we've been having those discussions because it should be all of that. And so now you see some of the schools are buying up property, and they're seeing that their value of being able to create their own capital and doing that. But for example, at the point, it's in High Point, North Carolina, and they're the largest employer for Black people in High Point. And so these are the type of things that you can, these are the type of things that we should be talking about, and we're talking holistically. HBCUs can lead this conversation. They have the capacity to lead this conversation because they literally are holistic by just being a university and dealing with all of, whether it's education or healthcare or economics or social or criminal justice. They have the capacity to bring all of that together. And it would benefit for them to see exactly why we are doing what we're doing. And I tell everybody, most of our parents choose our schools because the exact reasons why I chose and most people chose an HBCU, and for the exact reasons, right? And so being able to be cohesive in that, and being able to understand that we have like-minded parents and students who are all looking for a cultural education that they can't find elsewhere. They're looking to be uplifted like they cannot be elsewhere, and this is what we provide. And there is definitely cohesion. And I think sometimes the word charter might get in the way with things just because of the political aspect of it. But we are essentially the same mission as HBCUs. And we essentially are doing the same thing. I call it, we are many HBCUs. And we are plenty diverse and unapologetically 95% Black, but we are, or of color, but we are more diverse than I would if I attended UNC Chapel Hill. And that's a fact. And so we have the same story. We have the same exact problems. And our students come from wealthy to very poor in all of our schools. And so being able to get them to understand that we're your little sister, and we are doing this over here, and you're doing this over here. And there are partnerships being built. But I do think that doing it in a community way, being more cohesive of understanding our holistic responsibility, our holistic challenge, and our holistic capacity can meet that will be key.
Mr. Henderson, thoughts. I'd love to get your thinking on some of these issues.
Well, I'll have to go back to when I was in school now, if I can remember that far back. It's the same thing as it was when I was going to school, and I talked about it initially when you asked the first question. Well, part of it is resources. And in the education system, your public education system, just like it was when I was in school, going to a segregated school, we were the last ones thought about if there was anything left over. If there was any food left on the table, then we got the scraps. And so the same thing is holding true right now, is that a lot of our people that are in charge of the distribution of money are challenging guys like you that have the charter schools, and they call it school choice, but it's really not school choice, it's parent-student choice. And it is vitally needed. And what happens is that your HBCUs, in a lot of instances, they're struggling to stay above board themselves. It's like we've heard on this call before, it's not that they don't know how, they don't have the resources to actually get into the game. They're trying to keep their accreditation, they're trying to keep the number of students up. They understand that they are the resource for a lot of kids that if they don't go to an HBCU, they have no place to go. But again, it has to be like Marcus, I know he's seen it before, going down there lobbying and a smile on his face saying one thing, but he doesn't hear anything back from him. So we're dealing with the same old issue over and over again. So it's one of those situations we have to figure out. And so with what you guys are doing now with the scores that your kids are getting and how well they're being instructed, that makes a real big difference. And the other part of it is that the one who makes the most noise gets the most attention. And so I would hope that some of you who have put your heart and soul into these academies, that you will begin to talk to whosoever you need to talk to about the situations occurring and understanding that the problems we have in our communities, the economic problems and other crime problems and all those are not happening in a vacuum. It's because our public education system is failing our students. And what happened is that when we did integration, the Black kids in a lot of ways are just left on the side in the classroom, and there's social passing, and there was nobody there to work with those kids, understanding the challenges they had. They just needed an opportunity, a hand up and not a handout.
I think you hit the nail right on the head there, and I think a lot of this, again, it has to be thought of and in holistic ways. I hear that kind of term coming from all of you all, and you're thinking, Eric, I want to throw you into the mix here when it comes to and some of the comments coming through in the chat as well is talking about really, how do you market your school and how do you sell your school, not only to the students and parents that you have, but to the community around you for support. In poll after poll throughout the nation, especially in the South, over the last 5 to 8 years that I'm aware of, African-American parents and others, which happens to be the backbone of the Democratic Party's base, have registered support for charter schools from 60 to 80%. Yet Democratic elected officials have listened more to the opponents of charter schools within the party than to their own constituents. Why do you think that is? And how can parents and students and school leaders like yourselves and teachers of the schools in North Carolina specifically make their elected officials, particularly on the Democrat side, support what they want, what their constituents want for their own children?
Big one.
It's a loaded question, but it's a question I know you can answer.
I get asked, how do you increase math scores? I do want to say one thing to the previous thing about just teaching diversity, just really quick plug. I was fortunate enough to be on the Drive task force that was created by Governor Cooper and with the great leadership of Dr. Anthony Graham. And it was amazing. I learned much more than I was able to contribute. But the summary of that task force is something that maybe Rhonda can release. And it really goes into just the recommendations for increasing teacher diversity across the state. And it's a year's worth of work, and it's pretty amazing. So for those of you in North Carolina who have an interest in this, you really should take a look at it and find ways to support it, and maybe even plug it in terms of the areas that you feel are most needed. I guess I hope my answer meets your question. When I think of charter school, when I think of some of the issues regarding charter schools, and I think we've talked about kind of the paradigm of charter schools and what is created in people's heads, I think a charter school is like saying the word restaurant to me. It's like you cannot generalize every single restaurant by just calling it a restaurant. There's so much differences in each one of them and what they do, what they offer, what they provide. And charter schools, you just simply can't just throw them in this one category. Otherwise, you're not doing it justice. And to your point, Ron, you're not doing it justice to the schools that are doing it right and are really serving the public need. And I think it's the schools that are on this call, and I think many of the schools in our state and our country. As a result, you start getting politicians who look at it just as an aggregate thing, right? Just restaurants or charter schools, instead of looking at the KIPS and the Uncommons and in terms of the big schools, the idea, whatever, or in our state, when you think of Healthy Start and Sugar Creek, Marine Joy, us, whoever, they're not looking at it in that way. Otherwise, they would see how their constituents are truly being affected and impacted by these schools. And they would, I think, if they really did look into it and really did spend the time, they would spend more time thinking of how to create more of these types of schools, rather than, again, look at it from the schools that either aren't serving the public good, aren't doing it well. Looking at it from that perspective is I think what's hurting the schools that are doing it well. That would be my answer.
No, I think you're right, and I think I actually like that analogy. I'm actually going to use that, Eric, as I try to explain this a little bit more, because I think you're right. I think, oftentimes in today's society, right, cancel culture being what it is, either something is this or it's that, right? And there's no in between. There's no nuance. There's no spectrum. There's no continuum of what's high quality and what's not, right? And I think all of us would agree that to a certain extent, if something is low quality, whether it's a charter school or a traditional district school, right, there needs to be a reckoning, right? Because our babies are too precious for us to allow any nonsense that's going on that's creating a dissonance where kids are not learning and kids are not getting holistically bettered for the 21st century that they're going to find themselves in, and running the world when we're all too old to do it, right? So I think you're right about that. I didn't know if anyone else wanted to chime in on some of that based on your own experiences with your schools, and how do you deal with elected officials in your communities? Because typically our schools are in communities that are heavily Democratic, and in a lot of ways are heavily influenced by a lot of the opponents of charter schools who may not see your school, but again, see it the way Eric says that they see it as under an umbrella of charter schools. And so that means you are this, this, and this, and this. And you go, well, that's not my school. I know a lot of elected officials who walk through charter schools, having never visited one, and go, that's not what I thought it was. This is actually something that's good. I don't know if Cheryl or Michelle wanted to chime in on that, your experiences working with local elected officials, and how we can maybe nationalize the schools, as Eric said, that are doing it right and are showing growth and getting better as they go along.
Yeah, so we're going to have to do a better job, and that's our job. We're going to have to do a better job of promoting our schools and of getting the word out, getting the message out. They do walk through the school, and it's hard to deny when you see kids that are happy and they are learning, and staff who are committed and engaged. It's kind of difficult to think negatively about that. So we have to do a better job of getting them in the school buildings to do that. Of course, you have to, look deeper into, they're politicians, right? And so politicians need votes, and politicians need money, and they need, those organizations to support them and whatnot. But this is a Black history, positive webinar about the future of where we are going. So we want to continue to center the good that we are doing. And I just try to continue to push that out there to everyone in the community, regardless of their political affiliation. And, regardless of, as I say before many times, that educating a child and educating Black children, this is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. This is a heart issue. This is a humanity issue. And if you are about about equity and humanity and the full liberation of people, then you should support what helps them be their best. And if you do not support that, then you should be held accountable for that, and you should have to answer to it, especially if you say that you serve the public. So that's where I stand on that. Our parents, thank you, Mr. Henderson, for saying it's about parent choice. Our parents make a choice, and when a mother or father makes a decision for their child, for their African-American child, right? That is a choice that for centuries we did not have. right? Look at it in the larger context here, because choice is about freedom. And that is when that parent makes a choice, that is an act of freedom. That's a revolutionary act to make a choice. And then and then when they make that choice, and then they have a network and they have an organization that supports them in the choice that they've made, and it's going to be sustainable and it's going to support the community, that's also a revolutionary act. So I like to think about it in the larger context, not just a building that's going to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, because it's so much more. It's so much more than that. And our politicians, slowly but surely, I mean, you have to come around slowly but surely.
Ronald,
Yes, sir.
if I might add something, I have an organization, a task force that I work with in a different capacity. And one of the young ladies that's on that task force is a single mother. And I found out that her kids were attending an academy, and she's completely sold out on what academies do. And she talked about the difference that it has made with her kids going from the public schools to the academy. As a matter of fact, through that process, we got her where she was traveling around the country talking about it. So one of the things that you guys might do to have the schools is have your parents start to advocate for what was happening with their kids before and what's happening with them now. I think that would be heard more so perhaps than you, the ones that's running the schools or own the schools, if you get your parents more involved and show them have showcase the success that you had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cheryl, I know you want to chime in a little bit here.
We have had problems getting our local officials to be willing to come and visit our school, but when they come, they're converted. And we also need to lift up the schools that are really successful. A few years ago, Eric's school was the Title I School of the Year for North Carolina. Only charter school to ever have been Title I School of the Year. And that's a big deal. When 90% of your kids are proficient, that's a huge, big deal. And we need to lift those things up so that our elected officials realize, A, that these are schools of color, because generally not, so that they are schools of color, and that these are charter schools that are performing in that way.
Well said.
I would just add real quick, as
Go ahead,
a
Marcus.
legislator and a lobbyist, there's two parts of this. Not only lifting up our stories, but we have to let the parents know, which they don't know, that it's their elected official that goes against us. And most Black parents don't know that their Black elected officials are mainly the cause of why we don't have transportation, or they're mainly the cause of why we don't have equitable funding. And the parents don't know that. And so, because if the Black caucus went and gathered behind us, there would be absolutely no problem getting anything passed in the world. And so not only educating them to for that matter, but like allowing them like to let the public know that, because even if they're not a parent of your school, some grandparents are like, oh, my child goes to this school and they're part of that. Oh, I love the Pointer, I love Sugar Creek, and I love Henderson, because, and it might not even be a child, but it's a community that would support that, not just the parents. And so, and letting them know that, hey, we need to support our school. And did you know that the main reason why we can't get things done is mainly because of people that you keep electing? And so that's really the other piece. That's all I was.
Ron,
Good, Clarence.
I would like to pose this question to Marcus especially. What do you think about Marcus putting together a busload of parents or something, going down, making an appointment and going down to the General Assembly and making your voices heard? And maybe it'd be something you've tried before, but we know we have to start someplace.
And Marcus, I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to answer that, and that's gonna be your closing, because I'm gonna give everybody else 30 seconds to do their closing. So answer Mr. Henderson's issue and go, you're on.
Okay, I will close at the same time and I will do it in less than 30 seconds. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be on this esteemed panel. It was great to see everybody. We have tried this before. We do it pretty much on an annual basis. Because of COVID, we haven't been able to do it this year. But one thing I would like to see in specific, I would like to see schools of color, the ones that we have assembled here, to be able to have a similar rally to talk about issues that are specific to us. Because to Eric's point, all charters are not the same charters, and all of our parents have different issues. And to hear those stories about transportation and food and other things that go on within our charter schools would be a little bit more powerful than just having a lobby day that everybody comes, that we're lumped into.
Mr. Henderson, I'm going to give you 30 seconds for last comments.
Yes, my comments are, it's been a real pleasure being on this panel with you, and I see some sharp minds here, and you guys will figure it out. Don't lose heart and just continue to move forward and fight for our kids, because it is much needed. If you don't work with these kids, then who else will? And again, I truly believe that you find a way to get some of the voices of some of the parents heard, so you can do a comparative analysis of what's going on in your schools versus what's going on in the public schools. The Black kids, to take the label off of them by proving that they can compete rather than as well as anybody else.
Eric, 30 seconds.
Yeah, as was said, it's been an honor to be part of this call on this panel. I mean, just two things, right? Like, keep the conversation going. It's not just in February. It's not just in October. It's all year round. And the more we do it, similar to what Cheryl said, we can convert people. Like, we really can. They just need to come and see it. They need to come hear it. They need to come be a part of it. Too many people are in echo chambers and not understanding what's actually out there and what's actually going on. And as a result, they get tied to beliefs that they're not really tied to.
Ms. Turner, 30 seconds.
Well, I too would like to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel, and how much I would like to be a part of a group of schools that were willing to take on the Democratic leadership and try to get them to see what it is we do. And to Dr. Johnson, this is hard work.
Please enter your access code followed by the pound or hash sign.
This is hard work that we do. It is the work of the heart. And when people see it, when they hear our passion, they get on board with it. And we just need to figure out how to get that word out.
And to bring us home, Dr. Johnson. You're muted. You got to unmute yourself.
I am for quality education for all children, and I believe in parent choice. If a parent chooses a traditional public school, go for it. If a parent chooses a private school, homeschool, go for it. And if they choose my charter school, I will love them like they are my own. But we have a rich legacy. This was entitled The Legacy. And we have a rich legacy. And I want us to lift up our ability to open schools, our ability to run good schools, our ability to help re-educate, because there's been some miseducation in our community, and to re-educate. And I want us to embrace the power that we have, the collective power that we have to stand up and to work for African-American communities across the state of North Carolina. Cheryl, I'm with you on that. Let's do it, and we'll see what happens next in North Carolina.
Let me thank all of you before I kick it back to Rhonda for participating in this. This has been an incredible discussion. I wish we had another hour for this. But to those who may be Democrat elected officials and other community folks who may watch this after this is over with, we have to demand that all of our elected officials look at all of their constituents and all the public education and say, our kids matter too. Our parents matter too. If you're going to represent what's good in education, then represent what we want and our desires as well. When I think about what people like Clarence Henderson did, I think you said it best, Dr. Johnson, that he fought for a choice, for freedom, so we would have opportunities to do the things that other communities do every single day and people with means do every single day. It's a revolutionary act. And I want more folks of color Democrat or Republican, to see charter schools as one model to determine the self-determination, not only the education in your community, but the community empowerment that we all need to see to make our communities what they need to be in the 21st century. And with that, I'll kick it back to Rhonda. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for hosting us.
Well, it has been my pleasure. I'm just learning at the feet of some really, really special and intelligent people. I really appreciate all of you, Marcus, Ron, Clarence, Cheryl, Michelle, and Eric. You've been amazing. And I want to remind everyone, in case you didn't know, that 2021 is the 25th anniversary of the charter school law passing. Yeah, so this is the year to take some parents with us to Raleigh and talk to these legislators and let them hear their story. You can argue the politics all day long, but you cannot argue with a parent's or a student's experience. And that is the key. Y'all are making a difference in the lives of those students. And I want to thank you all. To appropriately address the challenges for Black students in education in North Carolina, the association will continue to focus not only on the student, but their families, as well as their communities. That's why I schedule a really important event coming up this week on Thursday at 1 o'clock. We have an economics professor from NC State University who's done extensive research on the benefits a charter school brings to a community or a neighborhood just by starting it up, that it makes a tremendous benefit in the economics of that community. So I encourage you to join us. And my last call to action is school leaders, invite the legislators. They might not come, but if they do, they're gonna walk away with an experience. And our legislators on the call, please take some time out to talk with these parents, school leaders, and students. You're gonna be glad that you did. Thank you once again, panelists. Ron, y'all have a great day, and I'll talk with you later.
Thanks, Rhonda. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.